They got a new theory out that says a lack of oxygen killed the dinosaurs. Now this article is worth reading the whole thing. Let me read this to you here. Dinosaurs weren't done in by a giant asteroid, as one theory holds, but by a change in the atmosphere that meant there wasn't enough oxygen to support their inefficient respiratory systems. A new theory suggests. A new analysis of air trapped in 120-million-year-old amber found in east-central Minnesota casts doubt on the notion that the dinosaurs starved to death after a giant asteroid hit the planet 65 million years ago, sending up dust that blocked the sun and killed plant life. Dinosaurs were already on their way out by the time the meteor purportedly hit, says Gary Landis, a U.S. Geological Survey geologist, and one of the 4 scientists presenting their theory at the Geological Society of America's annual meeting today. The dinosaurs did not keel over with their feet up in the air, but they found it increasingly difficult to compete in their environment. The theory also carries implications for humans because it presumes that worldwide atmospheric changes can occur 10 to 20 times faster than previously thought. Let me stop right there and make this comment. It would be a neat scrapbook to have, to keep articles every time they say, this overthrows all the old theories. New fossil find, overthrows previous theories. Because there would be one from every week. They're constantly overthrowing some old theory, but they don't ever quite, ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth, the Bible says. They don't ever quite get all the way to say, oh, maybe the Bible is right after all. Okay, let's continue here. Landis and his colleagues tested air found trapped in the amber in east-central Minnesota. They found that the proportion of oxygen in the atmosphere fell from a high of 35% to a low of 28% within the relatively short time of between 300 and 500,000 years. It would be like taking a dinosaur for a stroll from sea level to 6,000 to 7,000 feet, Landis said. The oxygen-rich air resulted from volcanic activity, which pumped out carbon dioxide, which was converted into oxygen by plants. Now hold it, let's stop right there. Does he know that? I encourage kids, when I go to public schools and speak, I'll read through part of their textbook and I'll say, now wait a minute, is this what the author knows or is this what he thinks? You can see where they freely mix their science and their religion all the time. A lot of this is good scientific stuff, and then he mixes in his religious, well, this is what caused it. Now wait a minute, you don't know that. Okay, let's keep going here. Oxygen-rich air resulted from volcanic activity. I don't think he knows that. Dinosaurs evolved during this time when oxygen was plentiful and had a weak respiratory system, according to the theory known as the Pele hypothesis. Pele is the Polynesian goddess of volcanoes. Now this paragraph is important. An 80-foot apatosaurus had nostrils the same size as a horse. Now how is an 80-foot animal going to get enough air through nostrils the same size as a horse? The two things confusing about dinosaurs are their nostrils are too small and their lungs are too small. Those would be two good quiz questions there, Heidi. Two things that indicate dinosaurs had a different environment to breathe in. Smaller lungs, smaller nostrils. An 80-foot dinosaur could not survive today because he simply couldn't get enough air. You ever had a real bad cold and you could barely breathe through your nose, and it's, you know how hard it is to try to get a breath, okay? That would be the problem for the dinosaurs. Their nostrils are too small. We do know dinosaurs lived. We do know they got to be huge from the bones we find. The question is, when did they live? I don't think it's even worth arguing about what they look like. What color were they? I don't care. Don't know. Let them, let the toy makers make them any color they want. It doesn't matter. When they lived, that matters to me. Amber is petrified tree sap. There are several ways things can be preserved as fossils. One is preserved in amber. What are some other ways fossils can be made? Preserved in rock. Preserved in ice, frozen in ice. Think of any other ways? Formaldehyde? Mummified. There have been things found mummified, just dried out. They died in a dry climate, and so they dried out, turned to like leather, and survived just fine. A lot of fossils we find are petrified by the mineral soaking into the bone. Some are just a casting of the animal. Animal falls in the dirt, makes an impression in the dirt hardens, but he rots. But you have the impression left behind. That's called an impression fossil. And who cares? Anyway, the insects trapped in amber, according to the article here, have 35% oxygen. Now, the air we're breathing right now is about 21% oxygen. This has been tested many times. You can take a candle burning on a little container with water around it, like get a big bowl, put a candle in there, and let the candle burn, and then put a glass over it. But don't have your glass quite touch the bottom of the bowl. Leave it up just a little. As the candle burns, it'll burn up all the oxygen, and it'll actually suck water up into the jar. How many have seen that before? And you measure how much oxygen's gone, you know, and you find out about 21% of the air we're breathing is oxygen. You can also do this with a mouse on top of a little block of wood inside there, and as he breathes up all the oxygen, slowly it comes up, and the mouse, pretty soon he keels over. Then you have to do mouth-to-mouse resuscitation. The air, apparently, from this evidence, we find the air before the flood was richer in oxygen. Now, if you combine these two possibilities, richer oxygen from pre-flood, of course, I believe the amber formed from the trees that were broken during the flood. When you break a tree, sap's going to ooze out, right? During the flood, you're going to get all kinds of broken trees. And you're going to get sap oozing out every place. Insects are going to come stick on the sap. Sometimes birds are found in petrified amber. Sometimes frogs are found. Insects are by far the most common. Interesting, all the insects they find are exactly like the insects alive today. And they will say, wow, isn't it amazing they didn't evolve at all in 80 million years? They don't even stop to consider that maybe they're not 80 million years old. You know, they don't even stop to consider that. You know, they know the evolution theory is true. This debate I was in a few weeks ago, I forget who it was now, but I said, what you guys have is a theory that you're convinced is true, but all you need now is some evidence and a mechanism for how it'll work. You got the theory down, now you need some evidence and a mechanism. It's just so ridiculous that they believe that stuff. Doubling atmospheric pressure and increasing oxygen does some neat things to your bloodstream. Your blood has little red blood cells in there that carry oxygen. When it's oxygenated, it turns red and it goes through the lungs and picks up oxygen. And then the mechanism of how the body absorbs oxygen and releases oxygen is absolutely amazing. That would take billions of years to evolve, of course. And before it evolved, nobody lived. They all died while they were trying to evolve this complex oxygen transport system. But the oxygen, the red blood cells have a maximum carrying capacity. They can only hold so much. One of the problems with sickle cell anemia, which is a disease that only black people get, the red blood cell, instead of being shaped like a donut, it caves in so it looks like a sickle, like a part of a moon, a crescent moon. Now you have much less surface area, so it holds less oxygen. So a person with sickle cell is very likely to have a very difficult time breathing, or at least carrying oxygen to the body. And it's very often fatal, people with sickle cell. We had a girl, you don't remember her, Eric, you were too small, but a girl rode our bus in Illinois, in Kankakee. Her mother and her father were brother and sister. Her mother was 9 when she was born. Her father was 10. It was her incest. Okay. Well, she had sickle cell anemia. She rode our bus, sweet, godly girl, loved the Lord. She lived to be 13 years old and died. She was sick a lot during those 13 years and finally died at age 13. Sickle cell is where the blood cell collapses and it won't carry enough oxygen. But if you get enough pressure, not only will your hemoglobin and red blood cells carry oxygen, your plasma actually absorbs oxygen. Now, plasma is the juice that your blood is, the liquid part of the blood, not the solid part like the platelets and the red blood cells and white blood cells. It's the liquid part. You can donate plasma. Anybody done that before? Donate plasma? They stick a needle in, take your blood out, and they spin it in a centrifuge, I believe, to separate the solid particles, and they put those back in. They just keep the liquid part, plasma. The advantage of using plasma is it doesn't matter what blood type you are. If a soldier is shot on the battlefield, you don't know what blood type he is, well, give him plasma. That'll certainly help. You have about 1 pint of blood for every 15 pounds of body weight. So a 150-pound person has 10 pints of blood, a little over a gallon. Gallon and a quart. So if a guy's been shot and he's already lost, 4 pints of blood, he's only got 10. It starts to get pretty serious pretty soon. Anyway, under double atmospheric pressure, plasma gets oxygen saturated, so I say in the seminar, before the flood came, If you had double the air pressure and increased oxygen, you could run for hundreds of miles without getting tired. As your body gets depleted in oxygen, you begin to cramp up, especially if you can't carry away the lactic acid from the muscles. That's what causes cramps. And who cares? It's not biology class. But anyway, Jessica McClure, and there's still a controversy today about how she ended up down in that well. She was 18 months old. There were two neighbor kids, I believe neighbor kids, that were 5 and 6 years old playing over there. Some people think, you know, they shoved her down the well. Because how do you get an 18-month-old kid down in an 8-inch pipe? Nobody knows. However she ended up down there, she was stuck in this pipe. Maybe, how many saw the movie about Jessica, baby Jessica stuck in the well? They've played it on TV a couple of times. The problem is her left leg was down in the pipe, and she did the splits and was down in the pipe 20 feet down. This is an old abandoned well. I don't know how deep the pipe was altogether, but it was just amazing the way they rescued her. You know, had to dig a tunnel beside it and chisel over, but the rock is just real hard rock in that region. And so they finally got her out of the well. Well, she'd been down there nearly 2.5 days, 58.5 hours in this well. Lots of her body was black from lack of circulation. You can see on the picture here the black spots where blood wasn't circulating. This does the same thing as frostbite or fire. Freezing or burning has the same effect on your skin. It destroys it and it dies. Lack of oxygen will do the same thing. If you ever sleep on your arm wrong or something and you wake up and it tingles real bad, ever done that? Or sit on your foot for a long time and just tingling, you've cut off the blood supply and the lack of oxygen to the tissue there. Well, Jessica, after being in the well for 2.5 days, they said, we're going to have to cut her leg off. One doctor said, well, hey, before we cut her leg off, let's put her in a hyperbaric chamber for a while. These were invented, I believe, just for scuba divers that come up too fast. If you're down under water, everything's pressurized, including the air in your lungs is pressurized. And the air in your blood gets pressurized. So after you're down underwater swimming around, your body gets used to this pressure, and you feel just great. But if you come up real fast, those little tiny air bubbles in your blood grow because the pressure's let off. If you put a balloon in a pressurized chamber, the balloon will shrink down. When you relieve the pressure, the balloon will come back up. It responds to the pressure. What's happening in your blood, these little tiny air bubbles are going around, no problem, everything's fine. But blood vessels come along and they split and branch off like tree branches. Every time they split, they get smaller. Eventually, you get out to the capillaries, which are extremely tiny, and there's zillions of those all over your body. Well, you have an air bubble that normally flows right through your capillaries and everything, but now it's 4 times normal size. It's going to come along and plug up the hole because it can't fit through the hole. Well, wherever that blood was going is now not getting any blood. And so what ends up happening when a person gets what's called the bends, they get so many of these thousands of little air bubbles all over in their body, it's plugging up capillaries or arteries every place, and it shuts down their circulation. The heart's still pumping, but you shut the valves off. It can't go anywhere. And so you got 2 solutions. Get them cold. In the old days, they would take scuba divers that come up too fast and got this disease. They call it the bends. They would put them in ice, put them in a bathtub full of ice. What happens to air when it gets cold? It shrinks. A little more humane solution is put them in a chamber and pressurize it. Now, you have to be careful because when you change pressure on the body, things get hurt. Your eardrums, little piece of skin with air on both sides of it. You build up pressure on the outside, it's going to pop in. You build up pressure on the inside, it's going to pop out. Now, to equalize the pressure, anybody know what the little names of the little tubes are that help equalize the pressure in your ears? Eustachian tubes. Little tiny tube, you won't need that for the quiz, but they go from the inside of your eardrum to the inside of your nasal cavities. So if you're going up and down the mountains, you know, and your ears are hurting, you hold your nose and blow. By doing that, it blows air through these eustachian tubes and equalizes the pressure. Little rabbit trail, I like to chase rabbits. When babies are born, the slope of the eustachian tube is different because their nose is a different height than their ears. As you grow, these change position a little bit. So in babies, the eustachian tubes are pointed down just a little. So any infection gets in there, runs out to the ears. As an adult, it's going to change position, and it's going to run into your nasal cavities, and you swallow it, and you never notice it. So the solution, if the eardrums, or if it's packed, if the eustachian tube is packed from this fluid behind the ears, the kids are going to get ear infections. Any pressure changes, the eardrum stretches, and the kid screams, ah, because it's hurting. Your eardrum is stretching. Many years ago, teachers would box. They'd say, I'm going to box your ears. Come up behind some kid and bam, slap the side of his head. Now what's going to happen? You got a column of air right here that you are now compressing suddenly. It's going to split the eardrum going in, right? Thomas Edison had his ears boxed as a kid and was nearly deaf the rest of his life, which is why a lot of his inventions had to do with hearing type things to help people hear better, because somebody boxed his ears. Okay, we'll get into more Jessica in just a moment. Let's take about a 3 or 4 minute break. All right, let's talk more about these hyperbaric chambers. This one holds one person. They slide the person in. It's all glass so the person doesn't get too claustrophobic. But these were used, maybe even developed for people who got the disease called the bends. That's from coming up too fast, relieving the pressure, air bubbles build up, shuts off blood supply, and you die from lack of circulation to the various tissues. Baby Jessica was put into a hyperbaric chamber, pressurized to 2.18 atmospheres. Now in America, we measure our tire pressure in so many pounds per square inch. In most of the rest of the world, they measure it in atmospheres. If you go check your tire pressure at the gas station in Germany, they'll stick the gauge on and say, you got 2 atmospheres. Well, what is that? Okay. 1 atmosphere is 14.7 pounds. That's at sea level. Because there's enough air above us right now that we're living at the bottom of an ocean of air. If you get up to the top of the ocean of air, you'll be gasping for breath. You won't be able to breathe up there. And if you leave, you'll really be gasping for breath. The pressure of this column of air, 200 miles thick over us, is about 14.5 pounds, 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's an enormous amount of pressure. If you figure how many square inches of body you have, that's an awful lot of pressure. If you take a can and you remove all the air from inside, it'll cave in just because of the air pressure. You do these experiments where you can, drop a piece of burning cloth or burning paper inside a can and put the lid on. As it burns, it creates a vacuum, slight vacuum, removes 20% of the oxygen, sides cave in. Did that stuff for science class all the time. Okay, they put Jessica in one of these chambers and filled it up full of pure oxygen to 2.18 atmospheres. Within a few hours of forcing oxygen into her system, her leg turned pink. Most of her skin was saved. What would have been a very serious illness or a very serious problem from all the lack of oxygen turned out to be fine. The largest chamber in America that I've been able to find is in Pensacola, Florida, University Parkway. In an emergency, they can hold 30 people at a time. There are over 400 hyperbaric chambers in America now. The vast majority are located along the coastlines. Why would that be? That's where most of the scuba divers are going to be, right? Many big cities, though, are getting hyperbaric centers, hyperbaric treatment. I called these folks here. There's their phone number, 850-969-7990. And they said you have to get a doctor's order to get in there. You can't just go try it out. And it's about $16,000 for a complete set of treatments, which is 2.5 hours, I believe, per treatment in 20 treatments, if I have my facts, or something close to that. So 2.5 hours times 20, how many hours are you in there? 50 hours for $16,000, $800 an hour. And they're going to pump it up to high pressure oxygen. You could do similar effects, not quite the same. They do it just by getting helmets, like divers' helmets, like the old-fashioned big metal helmets the scuba divers would wear, and pressurize just what you're breathing. No sense pressurizing your arm. I mean, it's not absorbing any oxygen anyway. So you probably could do this a lot cheaper, and some places have just the pressurized hyperbaric helmets that you wear. In West Germany, they're treating stroke patients with hyperbaric treatments. Because a stroke is a blood clot or something that stops circulation to part of the brain, and so since its lack of circulation is the problem, you pressurize oxygen and healing takes place much faster. In England, they're treating multiple sclerosis with hyperbaric treatments and getting amazing results. In France, they're treating diseases like arthritis, with simply forcing oxygen into the system. In India, they treat leprosy. There's a couple of websites here, hyperbaric.com if you want to check it out to learn more about hyperbaric treatments, or the email hyperbaric1@earthlink.net. But you can get information. Yes, sir?
Actually, it conducts surgery in hyperbaric chambers now. Duke University has a chamber actually about 2/3 the size of this gazebo.
Who has one? 2/3 the size? Duke University? And they conduct surgery inside the chamber. So the doctor and everybody's pressurized. Interesting. This is a fascinating article. I'm tempted to read the whole thing. Let me just read you a few key ingredients out of here. Oxygen halves, or cuts in half, the infection rate. They said right here, the air is about 21% oxygen, but patients routinely get 30% oxygen during and after surgery because lungs don't work well under anesthesia. The study tested whether a richer mixture would improve the outcome. It says they boosted oxygen to 80%, and it made a tremendous difference. Normally, surgery is done with a patient breathing oxygen, but he's only breathing 30%. They said, let's try it at 80%. Everybody was worried the lungs would collapse, but they found absolutely no problems in the study. It tells about it here, just released a few months ago. This says in this circle here, there was also an unexpected benefit. Patients who got extra oxygen were half as likely to be nauseated after surgery. Interesting. And it's just fascinating to read the whole thing about, I would recommend when you get the videotape, just hit pause right there and read that article because it's really interesting. This is a small chamber that only holds one person. A lot of professional teams have their own hyperbaric chamber. Dallas Cowboys have one. New York Jets. Now, why does a football team need a hyperbaric chamber? Promotes healing. Exactly correct. And they've discovered, sure enough, their injured players will heal twice as fast. Now, you figure it's going to cost them roughly $500 to $800 per treatment to put the guy in there. But if that gets him back on the field 3 weeks earlier, and you're paying him $10,000 a minute to go out there and play with that ball, you don't care what it costs to get him well. You want him well, right? You want to get your own chamber to keep at home? This is a hyperbaric sleeping bag. Michael Jackson has, Michelle Jackson has one of these. Says it's going to make him live forever. You can't quite get up to double atmospheric pressure, but you do get much higher oxygen. Well, it's got a little oxygen cylinder. It pumps it in.
How do you get the pure oxygen?
You can go to welding supply shops and get a bottle of oxygen. I got one in our bedroom. Remember, we had one for Mom. We just took the hose while she was, healing from this tailbone injury. We would just, sleep with oxygen just barely flowing, just to increase the oxygen in the room. It wasn't pressurized. Didn't see any dramatic results, but adding oxygen to the system helps.